Well, I won't be quite as eloquent, but I'd like to address particularly the proposed ESS2 on labor. Mark explained in one of the principles of the new safeguard suite is that the intention of the bank is not to have borrowers be obliged to deal with different requirements from different lenders. Well, your draft ESS2 will actually do exactly that. Let me say that we welcome the fact that there will be, for the first time, or it's proposed at least, a standard or a safeguard on labor. The World Bank is actually behind several other multilateral institutions in that regard. IFC has had one since 2006, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development since 2008. The African Development Bank adopted one late last year, and it's been applied for the recent years. Now, just in recent months. Now, your ESS2, proposed ESS2 actually has made two major weaknesses and two major departures from the template that was established by the other two banks. One of them is the proposal that countries be obliged to comply with the core labor standards in a variable fashion. Countries that do not fully, for example, respect freedom of association would not be obliged to comply with them on World Bank funded projects. Now, all the other banks, the basis, the core, if you like, is the necessity to respect the four fundamental rights that have been enunciated by the ILO. The ILO is referenced in the other standards, the specifically 8 ILO core conventions. They're not even mentioned in ESS2. So I think that is one major weakness. The other is the proposal, which we find totally discriminatory and totally inconsistent with the rest of the standard, is a proposal to completely exclude all contract subcontracted workers. Now, these are the most vulnerable people in World Bank projects. We have documented evidence of people not being paid, of child labor, unsafe working conditions, denial of freedom of association. ESS2 would do nothing to correct that, because the vast majority of people that work, for example, that work in World Bank infrastructure projects are in that category of subcontracted or contracted workers. And again, that's a major departure from all the other banks that specify that the borrower has a responsibility to ensure that subcontractors also comply with these standards. And I say it's inconsistent with the rest because in ESS1, it's actually written the borrower has the obligation to ensure that the standards apply to contractors and subcontractors, but an exception is made for labor. I really do not understand. I don't see any logic for making that exception. And what will result is that contrary to what Stéphane mentioned at the beginning, is that you will have continued child labor, you will have continued cases of forced labor, you will have continued unsafe working conditions in World Bank project because these are subcontract workers. And I think that's particularly deplorable that would continue the day after my good friend and colleague Kailash, along with the very brave Malala from India, along with the very brave Malala of Pakistan, won the Nobel Prize for their work on child labor and education. So I think there are some major corrections. I do welcome the fact, which I just learned today, that the bank intends to reconvene these special, I'm not sure how you call them, but the specialist groups that will look at the different themes. We contribute to the first one. We had no news for the past year and a half on how you develop this safeguard, and if the intention is to consult those people and others on improving the proposed ESS2, we'll be happy to take part in that. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
My name is Gelson Garcia. I'm from the southern Philippines. Last week, September 29 to October 1, more than 30 organizations, mostly from Asia, representing labor groups, gender and SOGI groups, and several other environmental, socio-economic justice groups assembled to analyze what the broader implications are of the draft safeguards. And they came up with this document. What the document says in general is they reject this draft environmental and social safeguards framework for a number of reasons. But I just want to highlight a very, very important paragraph why they are rejecting it. The draft safeguards demonstrate the stand of the bank that it is more than willing to retrogress instead of taking accountability for its actions, for uploading bank responsibilities to borrowers and financial intermediaries. It also allows the World Bank to escape even the basic human rights standards and environmental obligations applicable to borrower countries. And they said, don't get us wrong. We uphold national sovereignty. We uphold the national interest because at the end of the day, the government should take ownership of development programs. However, don't use the national sovereignty as an excuse to provide overall latitude to the government, and that means delegating your responsibility to the borrower. Why? Because while we recognize that there are a number of governments that have the ability to implement such projects, there are many differences in the way many governments are governing the implementation of development programs. In the draft, you have not even articulated the sequencing in which you're going to adopt the country systems. Don't get me wrong, in personal, because I have also worked at the national government, and I have seen how the development projects supported by the bank are being implemented at the sub-national and local levels. The reality is much more complicated and grimmer than what your narrative presents. Your draft does not even say how you're going to sequence the adoption of country system, which ones should be adopted and should not be adopted. You are not even articulating there how are you going to do a capacity assessment and policy equivalency assessment before you try considering adopting this policy in the implementation of the project. You do not even mention there the role of the independent monitor. You do not even mention there the way in which whether there are clear indicators in the use of specific country safeguard system in the lending agreement. So for them and for us, which I support, I came from the Global South, I support the statement. There is one specific question that they want to ask and they want you to commit. They want you to recall this draft, put it back to the drawing board, and address significant failures and weaknesses in the draft, including the need to ensure that the existing safeguards that are already strong should be kept, not diluted, and expand the application of the safeguards, not just to investment loan, but also to the growing lending instruments that you are using, P4R and policy-based loans. Now, this is again not the same question. Are you going to commit to have this draft recalled, brought back to the drawing board?
Thank you.